I stood on the bottom step of the stone entryway, smoothing the silk of my dress. The evening air felt cool against my skin, but my hands were entirely steady. Above me, filling the heavy oak doorway of the venue, stood my son. His hand was pressed firmly against the doorframe, a physical barricade between me and the warm golden light spilling from the reception hall. Over his shoulder I could see them, the guests, people I had known for decades, neighbors, family friends, all holding crystal champagne flutes, pretending not to watch the awful spectacle unfolding out on the stone terrace. Daniel's jaw was tight and his face was flushed with a mixture of panic and resentment. He looked down at me, the mother who had raised him alone, and his voice was a strained, low hiss. "You weren't invited, Mom." The silence that followed was absolute. I didn't cry, I didn't beg or argue. I just looked at him and said, "I know, Daniel." He thought that was my lowest moment. He was very wrong. It was his. Before I tell you how it came to that, let me say this plainly. This is not an easy story for me to share. Some lessons mean something only when you share them, and this one cost me more than I expected. I have changed names, places, and a few details, because whatever my son did, I'm not here to turn pain into spectacle. I'm here to tell the truth of it, and I know I'm not the only mother who has stood outside a door that used to be open. If you have ever felt erased by someone you raised, tell me where you are watching from out there. I'd like to know I'm not alone tonight. To understand why that doorway mattered, you have to go back to the spring after my husband died. Daniel was 8 then, all elbows and solemn eyes, kneeling in the dirt beside me with a pair of child-sized gardening gloves slipping off his wrists. We planted rose bushes along the front walk together because I needed something living to tend, and he needed something he could help me save. He packed the soil with both hands and looked up at me as if a good job in the garden might somehow hold the world in place. That house had been built board by board with my husband's overtime and my budgeting. By the time he was gone, it was paid for. No mortgage, no debt. Just memory in the walls and Daniel's height marks inside the pantry door. I used to tell him, lightly, as mothers do, that one day it would all be his. The house, the roses, the life we had protected. I had spent 32 years as a forensic accountant for the state, and by then I had already learned that paper rarely lied. Only people did. I noticed numbers that did not belong, signatures that leaned too hard, dates that arrived a little too neatly. 5 years before the wedding, I retired. 6 years before it, I buried my husband. After that, the rose garden became the one ritual that never failed me. Even after Daniel moved out, he came every spring to prune with me. We would work in companionable silence, and for an hour or two he was still my boy again, dirt on his hands, sun on the back of his neck. So when he brought Miranda home and introduced her as the woman he meant to marry, I led her straight to the roses. I remember touching one bloom and saying, "Someday this will be yours too." She smiled, gracious, beautiful, measured. At the time I thought only this. Thank God he found someone willing to listen. I did not understand that people listened long enough to learn what mattered to you. The first crack was so small I nearly dismissed it. Daniel had called me every Sunday for years, not because I demanded it, but because habit is one of the quiet ways love survives adulthood. Then, over the course of a few months, he began forgetting. One missed call became 2, then apologies that sounded borrowed. When I rang him myself, Miranda answered more and more often. Her voice was always honeyed, always patient. "He's resting," she would say. "I'll have him call you." He rarely did. Then my Identity Protection Service sent me an alert, an inquiry on my credit report I had not authorized. The stated purpose was estate planning. I remember staring at the screen, feeling that odd, cold sensation I used to get when a case file began to smell wrong before I could prove why. I called the bureau, made notes, and filed it away in my mind. Not long after that, Miranda began talking about my house in a tone I recognized immediately. Casual on the surface, acquisitive underneath. She suggested a townhouse in a gated community. "Something safer," she said. "You're alone out there, Mom." Another time, standing at the foot of my staircase, she touched the banister and said, "We worry about you on those stairs." Daniel repeated it almost word for word a week later, and that repetition bothered me more than the sentiment. My son had his own voice. Lately I heard hers coming out of his mouth. They framed everything as care. "Let us help. Let us manage things. The big house is too much now. We can take care of it until you're ready to transfer it." Transfer it. She said it lightly, as though she were discussing potted plants, and not the home his father built with his own hands. When wedding planning began, I offered to help. Flowers, invitations, catering, any of it. Miranda laughed softly and squeezed my wrist. "Oh, we're keeping it very small," she said. "Just intimate. The two of us and a few close friends." Daniel mentioned a date once in passing, almost absent-mindedly, as though it had slipped out before he could stop it. No invitation ever came. No follow-up. Nothing in the mail. I bought a dress anyway, because a mother should not have to wait for stationery to know whether she belongs at her own son's wedding at all. 3 months before the wedding, my attorney called me after 9 in the morning. His voice carried that careful uncertainty people use when they think they may be speaking to someone fragile. He said he was following up on the updated deed package I had sent over and wanted to clarify one provision before final review. I told him I had sent no such thing. There was a pause long enough for both of us to understand that whatever came next would not be small. I drove to his office myself. I remember taking my handbag, my reading glasses, and the folder where I kept my property records, because old habits do not disappear simply because you retire. He met me in the conference room looking embarrassed. On the table sat a draft transfer document naming Daniel and Miranda as future owners of my home upon incapacity or death. The language had been backdated to make it appear as if I had initiated it weeks earlier. My signature was on the bottom. It was a decent forgery if you did not know where to look. I knew where to look. Attached to the draft were printed emails from an address designed to resemble mine closely enough to fool an office. In them, I requested the change and wrote that I was having trouble remembering things lately, so it would be best to put everything in order now before matters become confusing. That line sat in my chest like ice. My attorney kept apologizing. He said he had not finalized anything because something about the timing, the phrasing, the tone of the messages felt off. He was right. They sounded like what younger people think age sounds like: vague, grateful, frightened. I asked for copies of every page, including the email headers. I did not cry in his office. I thanked him, took the file, and drove home. Then I went straight to the rose garden and sat beside the bushes Daniel and I had planted together, watching the light drain out of the yard until there was nothing to pretend. I sat with that file in my lap and considered driving to their apartment that night. I could confront Daniel, lay the papers on his kitchen table, and demand an explanation. But 32 years of reading, forged ledgers, and rehearsed denials had taught me what happens when you show your evidence too early. People pivot, they reframe, they make you the problem. If I accused Miranda now, she would claim a misunderstanding, a helpful gesture taken the wrong way. Daniel would stand beside her because that is what new husbands do. And I would become exactly what those emails had painted me to be. A confused, bitter old woman who could no longer tell care from conspiracy. One document is not a case. It is an invitation for someone to lie better. So I called Pauline. We had worked together for 15 years before she retired from the state investigator's office, and she answered on the second ring as if she had been waiting. I laid out everything: the credit inquiry, the forged signature, the emails written in a voice that was supposed to sound like mine. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You need the whole picture," she said. "Let them think you suspect nothing." From that night forward, I became an actress. When I called Daniel the next day, I let my voice waver. I apologized for being difficult. I admitted that maybe I was feeling overwhelmed, that the house was getting to be too much. Miranda took the phone halfway through and I could hear her smile through the receiver, warm and satisfied, the voice of a woman who believed she had already won. Let her believe it. For 3 months, I played a version of myself that did not exist. On phone calls, I repeated questions I had already asked, letting my voice trail off in the middle of sentences as if I had lost the thread. I forgot plans I had made. I thanked Miranda for explaining something for the second time, then asked her to explain it again. I let Daniel sigh. I let him use that impatient tone children use when they have decided their parents are diminishing. It cost me something to perform that part. But not as much as it would have cost to be made invisible without anyone knowing why. While I stumbled through my role, Pauline worked. She was meticulous, patient, and she never once asked me if I was sure I wanted to know the truth. She already knew. First, the phone records. Miranda had contacted my bank, my doctor's office, and my attorney's firm, each time identifying herself as calling on behalf of me. Referencing account numbers and personal information she could only have obtained by going through my files during visits I now realized had never been casual. Then a notarized statement from my neighbor, Helen. She had seen Miranda walking through my house months earlier with a tape measure, taking dimensions of rooms, making notes in her phone. When Helen asked what she was doing, Miranda laughed and said they were planning some renovations for when the old lady's ready to move on. Helen had not known what to do with that at the time. Now she did. Finally, a screenshot from Miranda's private Instagram. The wedding venue, the floral arrangements, the seating chart. 150 guests. Not small, not intimate, and my name nowhere on the list. The night before the ceremony, Daniel called. His voice was awkward, halting, the voice of a man following a script he did not write. "Mom, I meant to tell you, it's really just close friends, you understand?" I let the silence stretch long enough for him to feel its weight. Then I said, "I understand, sweetheart." I did not argue. I did not cry. I simply hung up and looked at the dress I had already laid across the bed. Tomorrow, I would wear it anyway. The morning of the wedding, I dressed with the same care I had brought to every important day of my professional life. Modest jewelry, a dress I had chosen not for show, but for dignity. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who had earned her clarity. I did not go to cause a scene. I went to bear witness. When I arrived at the venue and climbed those stone steps, I already knew Daniel would try to stop me. What I had not prepared for was how small he would look doing it. One hand braced against the doorframe as if he could hold back 30 years of motherhood with his palm. Behind him, the guests were watching. Crystal clinked. Conversation died. The murmurs began to swell. I did not push past him. I simply stood still and let the silence do its work. "I'm not here to stop anything," I said, my voice calm enough to carry. "I'm here to give you a wedding gift." I held out the manila envelope. He took it, the way people take things they already fear, and I watched his face change as he opened it. The forged deed, the fabricated emails, Pauline's phone records, the neighbor's notarized statement, Miranda's Instagram screenshot, bright and incriminating. 150 guests, and not one of them was me. Miranda appeared at his shoulder within seconds, her face tightening as she scanned the pages. She started to interrupt, her hand reaching for the envelope, but I raised my voice just enough to cut through. "I spent 32 years reading documents for the state. Did you really think I wouldn't read the ones with my own name on them?" The room behind them had gone completely silent now. Guests I had known for decades stood frozen with champagne flutes halfway to their lips. Miranda recovered quickly. Her chin lifted and her voice turned brittle and dismissive. "She's lost her mind," she said, turning toward Daniel as if I were not there. "I told you this would happen. She's confused. She's paranoid." I reached into my handbag and produced the final piece. A recording. Miranda's voice, clear and unmistakable, discussing listing prices with a real estate agent 2 weeks earlier. "Once the transfer clears," she had said, "we'll want to move fast." Daniel's face crumbled. Not anger. Something worse. recognition. I looked at him one last time and said, "I didn't come to ruin your wedding. I came to make sure you know who you're marrying." Then I turned and walked away, my back straight, leaving the envelope in his hands. Behind me, I heard Miranda's voice rising, but I did not look back. They went through with it. I learned later that Miranda insisted that she smiled her way through the reception as if nothing had happened, as if 150 guests had not just watched her unravel on the terrace. But damage does not wait for permission to spread. Within a week, Daniel was at my door, alone. His face was pale and drawn, and he stood on the porch like a stranger waiting to be invited in. Miranda, he said, had gone to stay with her sister. He did not say for how long. I think by then he already knew. Divorce filings arrived within the month. Confronted with the evidence, Miranda did not contest. There was nothing to contest. Pauline had built a case so clean it left no room for reinterpretation. The forged documents were reported to the appropriate authorities, and my attorney's bar association opened a quiet inquiry into how those drafts had been submitted in the first place. I declined to pursue criminal charges. She wanted my house. She did not get it. That was enough. Daniel came by several times after that, each visit an attempt at apology. I let him speak. I listened the way I had always listened, carefully, completely. But I did not offer him absolution. "You chose her voice over mine," I told him once, standing in the doorway where he had once blocked me. "You will have to live with that." Eventually he stopped coming. I changed the locks the following week. Not because I feared him. Because some doors, once closed, should stay that way until the person outside has earned the right to knock again. Spring came the way it always does, indifferent to everything that happened before it. I was in the garden early one morning, pruning the roses Daniel and I had planted together in that first terrible year after his father died, when I noticed they were blooming better than they had in years. He sent a birthday card, no visit, just a card, handwritten, brief. I read it once and set it on the mantel. Maybe in a few years there will be more. Maybe not. The house is still mine. Some people will tell you forgiveness is the only way to heal, but I think clarity heals too. I know who I am. I know what I built, and I know this now. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love at all. If you have ever been the one left outside the door, I see you. Don't let them make you small. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.